Hi, and welcome to this training video. I'm going to explain to you how you can spice up your lessons and your slideshows with Pear Deck. So this session specifically focuses on getting started with Pear Deck and is more of the basic features. But if you do want to see a more comprehensive look at all of the tools in Pear Deck, and if you've already played around with it, feel comfortable using the platform, there is a 201 version, which is more of an advanced recording and shows you how to use Pear Deck a little bit more beyond just the basics. Our goals for today are to practice using Pear Deck and its features. So logging in, accessing your teacher account, using questions, the different types of question types that exist, using the different modes in Pear Deck, and then also navigating the teacher dashboard so you can see student feedback and data and responses. And then ideally, by the end of this session, you'll plan some ways that you can use Pear Deck in the future. So make a goal for Monday morning and then a goal for someday. So short-term and long-term goals for using this tool. All right, so with that being said, we are going to talk first about what Pear Deck is. So what is this tool? It is an interactive presentation tool. It's really an add-on or an application that works in Google Slides. So by that, I mean that you have to add it to your Google Slides account, and then from there you have all of the Pear Deck functions and the features. And what it allows you to do is to embed questions, reflections, survey your students, check for understanding through formative assessments, and just give them little built-in brain breaks throughout a presentation. So essentially what it does is it takes a static slideshow presentation and puts in more active learning opportunities and makes that a more dynamic presentation. And as we all know, keeping students engaged is really something that we always want to be doing. This is a great tool for supporting that. If you want to learn a little bit more about the benefits of using active learning in your classroom, I did link 2 research articles there, and they'll explain the brain science benefits of this and give you some overviews on active learning. All right, so in terms of the Universal Design for Learning framework and Pear Deck, there are lots of connections here. So I linked all the different ways that it connects, and as you can tell, it connects in many ways. Just to give you a brief synopsis, as I won't go through every single one of these checkpoints, is it obviously this supports engagement, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, because Pear Deck is a great way to keep students engaged. They're actively responding, they're interacting with you rather than just sitting there passively listening to a presentation. They're playing a role in that delivery. It's also great for really sustaining effort and persistence because it's a good way for you to get feedback from your students and understand maybe if they've mastered a concept or if you need to review it. So you can build in reflection questions and build in multiple choice questions to check for their understanding. And then in terms of action and expression, Pear Deck is really great for giving your students a way to respond. There's lots of question types. They can be responding by drawing, dragging and dropping, entering numbers. There's different ways to support that physical action there and for them to express their understanding in unique ways. So with that being said, what we're going to do is kind of give you an overview of using Pear Deck as a student. So when I did this session live, I gave a join code just to show you how to start the Pear Deck session, and then everyone went through some of these questions here as a student. So for the sake of this, what I'm going to do is start a session that is student-paced, so it can be done asynchronously. So if you wanted to view my presentation and see some of these sample question types, as if you were a student but don't have to wait on me to make it live, I'll give you a link to do that. All right. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm in Google Slides right now, and the way that you get Pear Deck is by adding the Google Slides add-on. So if you go over to add-ons here in your menu and you would do get add-ons, Pear Deck is one of the first ones that pops up. Otherwise, you can search for it. And after you do that, you're going to click Pear Deck for Google Slides and then open Pear Deck add-on. All right, so once you have Pear Deck here, the way that you would add questions is over here on the right. This is your little toolbar, and you would do start lesson whenever you're ready. So I already built in some questions, so I'm not going to walk you through that quite yet. And we're going to do student paced. And there's 2 different modes in Pear Deck. So there's student paced mode, which is great for asynchronous. You are not determining the pace. The students are going through this on their own. They don't have to wait for you. And it's really good if your students are scattered or you're in an e-learning environment by keeping them on a pace that works best for them. The other one is instructor paced mode, and that works best if you're in a live session with your students. So you could have a instructor paced mode on a Google Meet, or if you're in person with your students, The tip here that one of our teachers told me about that she's doing is whenever we're in e-learning, what she does is she sets up a student pace mode for the students so they can go through all the content that she needs them to on their own. But she also has an optional Google Meet the students can go to, and she does a live version then. So the students have choice. They can do the live version with her, or they can go to the student pace mode later on. So that is a great option there. So if you wanted to participate along with me right here, I would give you this link that I just copied on my screen. There's also a join code here, and students can always join a Pear Deck session by going to joinpd.com and then entering that code, which is right here. And if I maximize it, it gives me the link again and where students go to join. All right, so in student pace mode, the students go through the slides. They can go back and forth as they need to. It's really on their own pace. And whenever they get to a Pear Deck question, they have the opportunity to interact with that question. So what I'm going to do is actually pull up Pear Deck on another tab here and join so that you can see what it looks like from that perspective. I forgot what the join code is. Go back. All right, so now that I have joined as a student, it always gives you this little check here in the beginning, and then I can go through this on my own. So I see my slides here the teacher has made. I can go through them. On the bottom bar here, this is a really helpful feature that I do recommend that you turn on. It's not turned on by default on the teacher side of things. And this is the Immersive Reader. An Immersive Reader is a product that Immersive Reader is a product that Microsoft makes, and it's an accessibility tool. And it actually reads words out loud to your students. It is a picture dictionary like what we see right here. It can translate it into different languages. They can listen to it. They can actually have parts of speech highlighted. It's just a great accessibility tool. I would say that it's very similar to Read and Write for Google. It just works on within Pear Deck, whereas Read and Write wouldn't necessarily work on slides presentation. So I'm going through my slides. And when I get to a Pear Deck question, this is where the interactive piece comes in. So my teacher built in this Pear Deck slide, and I'm going to move this little drag and drop to whether I agree or disagree with this question. So I'm going to go over here. All right. And then my next question here, this is a different type of question type in Pear Deck. This is a drawing slide. And if I had to pick one type of slide in question type in Pear Deck that I like the most, it's probably this one because I think it's the most fun and creative. So you can actually choose the different colors here. You can do straight lines, you can highlight, and erase things if you need to in case you make a mistake. You can also type, and that's why I like it. So you can type and you can illustrate. I've seen teachers use this for students to make like their own comments on like a political cartoon or to add their own speech bubbles on a picture as if they were thinking about what the person was saying. It's a really fun option for your students. It's also great for diagramming, for circling parts of a text. Maybe if you're having students figure out where evidence is and you have the text on the screen and they're annotating, it's just a great option there. So I'm going to select my color here, and then I'm going to pick my choice. Whenever I'm finished, I just move on to the next one, and it shows me that I finished the slide here with a little check mark. This is a multiple choice question type, so I'm going to answer this multiple choice question. So it's another type of question that you can enter here. And then this last one that I wanted to show you is the last type of question type that's the most helpful, and it's a text response. So you can have students type out a response as well. I have this one set up to where they can enter multiple responses if they need to. So in this case, enter it, another response, and I can just be adding those along the way. So this is what it looks like from the student perspective. Now what I'm going to do is move back over to the teacher side of things. All right, and now that I'm back over on the teacher side of things, I can see what my students have been responding, okay? And there's actually two ways that you can get here. So I left this presentation open before I went over there into student mode, so I still have it open and can view the responses there. So here's the slide where the student had dragged their response. If I hover over it, it tells me what that student said. If I had multiple students who had responded, I could see them all here in a grid format. And you have some choices here. I can leave feedback for this student and tell them, great job. say whatever I need to say. And then over in the student perspective, they still have it open. They get a message here saying they have feedback. If they don't still have this presentation open, the next time they sign into Pear Deck and open a presentation, it tells them that they have feedback over here in this little corner. So that's a great way if maybe you're using this as a way for students to scaffold a writing process, or you're building skills to give them feedback along the way. And then they can see your feedback and move on from there. And you can add more feedback as you need to. All right. If I favorite this response, then if I wanted to display this in front of the whole class, any one that I favorite or star would be the ones that show up on my student's screen if I present this. And I'll show you that here in a few minutes. Other options here is I can hide this so it doesn't show up. So if you have a kiddo who puts something that's not necessarily appropriate, then you can hide the response if you project it and only use the teacher can see it. So I'll just be going along here, and it tells me again who answered the questions. I can view it this way, on top of each other, however I want to do that. All right. So I have this one set up here is student pace. So again, you can join this session if you wanted to and go along the slides with me. And you have some options here as the teacher if you need to leave this presentation. If I stop student pace mode, then it becomes a live session, and then I'm controlling the pace that the students go through this. The other helpful thing here is this 3-dot button. This is kind of your menu here as well. It's helpful if you name your session. Using the teacher view, you can go back and look at all of your past sessions and organize them from there. So it's helpful if you name it maybe after your class period or the day or the topic. The other things that are helpful is ending and leaving the session. If you end the session, then no more students can submit answers. It's done. What's submitted is what's going to stay there. If I leave the session, then it's still active for my students to work on it, but I don't have to have this tab open anymore. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to leave this session, and then it just kicks me back to my slideshow. So that is just the gist of Pear Deck, whether you're doing a live session or instructor paced. It's very similar there in the tools and features that you have and your ability to see live responses. So the next thing that we're going to do is get started in adding Pear Deck. So really, now that you've experienced it as a student, how do you get started with this tool? So like I said, the most helpful thing is to go to your add-ons menu here and add the Pear Deck add-on. So I would go add-ons, get add-ons, and then I'm going to search for Pear Deck. And it usually does pop up here as one of the first ones. And whenever I find it, I'll click install. I already had it installed. Otherwise, there's a blue button there. And after I've installed it, I'll actually open it from that same menu as well. So I'll click add-ons and then Pear Deck for Google Slides, and then open Pear Deck add-on. And this little sidebar over here is really where I can build my Pear Deck sessions. I can start them, add and record audio, and do a lot of fun features. The other thing, though, is you don't always have to open up this add-on to be starting a Pear Deck session and to be adding content. Technically, you can always get to Pear Deck from the Pear Deck website as well. And the helpful thing here is that I like to use the Pear Deck website whenever I'm looking at student responses. It's just a little bit easier to navigate and is a little bit more comprehensive in what it can show you from student responses here. So if I wanted to go to the Pear Deck website, I would go to teacher login, and then I would sign in with my BCSC Google account, and you should see a little tiara crown thing there, and that signifies you have a premium account. If you notice that you do not have that, please let me know so I can fix your account and get you good to go. All right. So after you have added Pear Deck, you can open it from that little add-ons menu. But there are a helpful couple of setup pieces here that might be good to go through before you actually start building questions and getting started. And that's just setting up some of your preferences on the teacher dashboard. So if I go back to Pear Deck, what we're going to do is just turn on some of those features that I showed you when I was on my teacher view. So I'm going to click my account, and I'm going to click my account. And what we're going to do is click settings. And on my settings, I'm going to toggle some things on. So that accessibility tool I told you about is turned off by default. You can turn that on. And then you can also turn on takeaways and require student logins if it's not already turned on. So a lot of people have noticed that requiring student logins is turned on for default for them. That was not the case for me. So it's helpful if you toggle that on. So anytime your students participate in a Pear Deck session, they have to sign in with their BCSC Google account so that you know who is who in the responses. Otherwise, they all show up as anonymous, and that can be really confusing when you go back and you try to figure out who said what. The other thing that's helpful to turn on is takeaways. And what takeaways is that anytime you have a live Pear Deck session or one that is student-paced or asynchronous, whenever you finish the session, takeaways creates a Google Doc. And on that Google Doc, it has all of your slides, all of the responses for each individual student, and it sends those students a copy of their responses. So if I was a student, this would be a great resource for me to maybe go back and use that as a note-taking tool to see how I responded, see my feedback I got from my teacher. It's a really interesting feature. It automatically shares it with the students that have editing rights, and you as the teacher have a folder of all the documents created for each student as well. So I like to turn that on just so it always shares it with the students by default. If you don't want to turn that on, then you can manually send takeaways to students each individual session. All right, so once you've turned on those features and whatever you need to do, then if you go back to Pear Deck, now what we can start doing is actually building questions. The best way to get started with Pear Deck is using the template library. So Pear Deck has created tons and tons of sample questions for you already. So if you're getting started with this, you don't have to feel like you're building from scratch. You can borrow some ideas and resources. And that would be my tip to use when you first get started with Pear Deck. Add a couple of template questions here and there. Just you get familiar with the platform, the students get familiar, and I wouldn't necessarily associate them with any content right away. Make them low stakes, just fun, random type of questions so that your students can focus on learning the tool more so than just mastering the content when they use it the first time. So if I come over here into my Pear Deck add-on, the template library is up here at the top. And this is where I can pull from some of the sample question types that Pear Deck has made for me. So you can look at them from at the point in the lesson you would like to add them, critical thinking and SEL. These critical thinking ones are awesome, by the way, love them. And you can even look through specific subject areas as well. The math ones are great because they have some formula features in there and graph paper. And I know sometimes it's difficult for math teachers to find tech tools that support equations and that type of typeface digitally. So if I move further up, I'm just going to do one during a lesson. And I already have this one in the slideshow because I like it. We're going to add it. And if I click on the question, it adds it there for me. Now, I kind of clicked through that a little fast, but if I hover over this, it tells me what type of question it is. When we went through this as a student a few minutes ago, I showed you 4 different types of questions. This is one of the draggable question types. All right, so I've added this question. Pear Deck did that for me when I clicked it. And if I like this question, I can move on from there. But if I wanted to edit this, you do have the ability to customize it a little bit more. So I can change the text here if I want to. I can change the pictures. All of this is like a normal Google slide. These are images and text boxes. The key thing is that make sure you do not delete this Pear Deck watermark across the bottom. This Pear Deck watermark is the coding and really the magic that makes this an interactive slide. And if you delete this watermark, it is just a static slide. Students can't do anything with it. It's not interactive. You can move the watermark if you need to. Just make sure that you don't delete it, because if you do, they can't use it anymore. All right. So with that being said, I've added this question on here and we are all good to go. And I can add lots more questions if I want to and keep moving from there. You know, there's not a limit on the number of Pear Deck interactive slides you can have in a presentation, although I don't think it's probably best practice to make every single slide interactive slide. Your students might get a little tired. All right, so that's the way that that works. Now, if you get started with that and you really like some of those examples, but maybe you're feeling like, I want to make my own custom questions. Maybe I already have some slideshow presentations that I've made in the past, and I already have questions typed out. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. How can I make some of those slides where I have pictures and questions interactive to where maybe students type out a response and answer the question I already have there, or they annotate parts of a picture that I already have on an existing slideshow presentation? You can totally do that. You can create custom questions on Pear Deck. And really what that does is it takes any slideshow that you have and it just adds that Pear Deck interactive watermark at the bottom so that now it's an interactive slide. So I'm going to walk you through how to do that. All right. So if I go back and I exit the template library, Here on my little Pear Deck add-ons menu is where I can just insert any type of Pear Deck question slide. And what this does is it doesn't add an entire new slide. It just makes an existing slide like this one interactive. And we went through what some of these different question types were before. So a text question is where they type out a response. Multiple choice is multiple choice. A number question is where they enter a number as an answer. It's kind of like a free response for math or science. Website takes them to a website. It's not necessarily a response type of piece, but it's a great way to embed and have websites in your presentation instead of hyperlinking and sending students out that way. Drawing is the one that I told you is probably my favorite because you can draw and type, and then there's the draggable one that we did a few minutes ago. So let's say that I had already made this slide presentation, and I really like my emojis because maybe that's the symbols and characters I've used with my students in class all year to signify how we're feeling and if we need to pause in the lesson and review things. So I have this set up, and if I wanted to make this a interactive slide with Pear Deck, what I'm going to do is decide what type of question I want it to be. So for this one, I'm going to make this a draggable interactive slide. So I already have my slide pieces here. I just added clip art, added my text boxes. This could be a presentation I made years ago, but now I'm just going to make it a little bit more next level. So I'm going to click draggable, and Pear Deck's going to show me a confirmation message that tells me that it's making it an interactive slide. And what I'm going to do is decide what I want that draggable piece to look like. So I could make it a star. I can actually change the color if I want to. You can add multiple draggable features too as well. So if you wanted to have students mark different parts of speech or mark parts of the map or label different pieces, basically have an opportunity to give multiple responses, you can do that. You can have up to 5, all right? So whenever I'm finished with that, I can also resize it too. I'll click Update Slide. And it's telling me it made it an interactive slide. If you notice, it added the Pear Deck watermark there. So we are good to go now. It is now an interactive slide for my students. And I didn't have to do any type of re-editing this or recreating my slide. I just added the Pear Deck interactive feature to it. So that's a pretty cool way to make a custom question. All right. So here's another example of a custom question just to show you some examples. This was a social studies example where the students could drag and drop different places on a map as well. So the other fun thing in Pear Deck is that you can make them a little bit more UDL in the sense of representation because you can add audio to a Pear Deck slide. The benefit of that is that it's great to give your students your voice and you explaining what they're going to be doing that day. So whether you have a sub or you're learning remotely and you're in e-learning, it's good for you to connect with your students and give them the option to read your instructions and read the content, but also hear it as well. You can also upload any type of pre-existing recording. So if you have a famous speech or maybe a part of a book being read out loud, you can add that to a Pear Deck slide as well. So right below Ask Students a Question, where we just did those custom questions, is the audio recording tool in Pear Deck. So I'm just going to delete the existing recording I had on this slide. And what I'll do is click Add Audio to Slide. It loads a recorder here. The first time you'll probably have to give it permission to your microphone. And whenever I do that, I'm good to go. So this is where you can upload a file you already have made, or I can record right here on the spot. I can just be talking and talking. You can record up to 30 minutes. And you have unlimited recordings in a presentation. You can only add one recording on a slide, but you can add multiple recordings throughout a presentation. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend making 30-minute recordings on every single slide, but you could technically if you wanted to. This is just a great feature. Whenever I'm finished, I'll click pause. I can resume, delete, or save, and I'm going to save it. And I'm just going to click Add Audio to Slide. And when I've done that, it adds an audio watermark here for my students. So when they actually view this presentation in student mode, they'll see that audio is included. So I'm just going to go back here to this presentation to show you what that looked like. You can see what it looks like from the student side of things when there's audio. All right. Okay. So this is what it looks like for students. They see this little audio included button on there, and they also now have a little audio recording button here, and this is where they could listen to my recording I added there for them. So I always like to make the audio recording watermark pretty big on the screen, just so there's no questions for my students on the fact that it's on the slide. I've seen some teachers just make that almost like the heading on their slide so it stands out to them. If you delete this little watermark, then again, it's just a plain old slideshow. This is where the audio file is stored. So keep that on there if you want to keep your audio. All right. Now to start a Pear Deck session, now that we've built our content, we've added audio, how do I get going with this tool? It is the big green button up here that says Start Lesson. So I'll have to have my add-ons menu ready here, and I'll click Start Lesson, and this is where I have a choice in the two different types of Pear Deck sessions that I can run. Student pace is what I showed you earlier, and that's where it's on the student's own time. It's great for e-learning when your students are checking in and doing work at different times during the day. Instructor pace is that live experience where you're on a Google Meet, where you're in front of your students and you're all going through this together. Since I showed you student pace earlier, I'm going to show you instructor pace this time. So I click instructor pace, and it's going to open up a menu here, and this is the information I'll share with my students to have them join the session. The other thing I want to point out is if I am on the Pear Deck website, I can technically build a Pear Deck session here and start a Pear Deck session here as well. I don't necessarily have to be in a Google Slides presentation to start one. So if I go to peardeck.com and I'm signed in, I have a bunch of Google Slides presentations right here. I could start one from there. I can even do a pop-up activity, which is a really fun thing. You don't have to have a whole presentation or slide deck made. It actually just brings up Pear Deck questions right there on the fly, so you can ask your students if you maybe are in a pinch for time and didn't prepare stuff in advance. So pretty cool, fun thing there. But if I had started this live session, this is where my students are going to join. So I'm actually going to leave this session and we're going to join this so you can see it from this perspective. You can also join via a link instead of the code as well. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So once my students are signed in, this is what it looks like for them. All right. So that's a live session. On the teacher side of things, I had to have one student in a live version, the instructor pace mode, before I can start. I'll click Start Class. Okay. So I'm just going through my questions as usual, working through them. And have students rejoin there if they need to. We always have a few students who are a little bit slower to join than others. I can see my students' responses here. If maybe I wanted to add a question, I could also add a new prompt as well. So it brings up the Pear Deck template library, and I can quickly insert any one of those template questions if I needed to. So that's another great feature to add in. If maybe you notice with your students you need to check for understanding, you can add them within a live presentation as well. So if I'm the student and I submit my response on that question, on the teacher side of thing in the live mode, I see that there's one student who's responded out of how many students have joined the presentation. If I lock the screens, that means students' answers are locked in. They can't change them. So it is what it is. They can't be moving around the draggable. It's stuck where it is. So that's a great way to put pause on the students while you're presenting. And this is where I can see the responses. Now notice when I'm presenting in this view, this is what my students are saying like on my projector and on my screen if I'm screen sharing. So it doesn't show what student answered what, which is great. It keeps it anonymous. But on the teacher side of things, when I go back to my teacher dashboard on Pear Deck's website, I can see who said what. So you won't see student names in this one to protect their privacy, but you could in your teacher dashboard. If I have lots of students here, I can see all of their responses and I can change my view from there. And I would just move on through my presentation. And if I am finished with this session, we've gone through all of our slides, I could click End, and then it's going to give me a prompt to name the session. And then because I set this up to where it automatically will send students their takeaways, I can send that or I can uncheck it. For this example, I'm going to send the takeaways to the student. So we're going to save and end. And it does take a minute to send those takeaways to our students. So that is how you start a Pear Deck session, all right? Other things to know here is Again, if I wanted to view my session data, I would go to the Pear Deck website, log in with my teacher account, and I'm going to go to sessions. And this is where I can see all my student responses, maybe after I have finished a live session. So I'm just going to refresh this page because we just did another one. If you have a bunch of sessions that you forgot to name, it does timestamp them here, and you can always go back and rename them as you needed to. It tells you the different types of sessions. All right. And then from there, I can view individual student responses as well and see what they said. So if I'm looking here, I click here, it brings up the view, the classroom view. So if I wanted to project answers for my students again, I could, but this button here is the teacher dashboard where I can see individual responses. So if I get to that point, again, this is where I can see all of my student work along the way. All right. Now, if I go back to my sessions, right, I can also look at any past sessions that I've had that are live. So if this was the live in-person recording, instructor-paced session, then I could click the dashboard there and see student responses. Let's say I forgot to send students their takeaways. And again, takeaways are that document that has all of your slides, all of the students' responses, and it even has a section at the top every single time for the students to write down notes. I can always send students takeaways by this three-dot menu as well. Now you have to have the session, it has to be a session that is closed to be able to send the takeaways to them. So if I click this three-dot button and I do takeaways, then it's going to show me a link to a Google folder that Pear Deck has made and shared in my Google Drive, the teachers, and it has a takeaway document for each one of my students. It automatically shares that document with the students so you don't have to, and it's just a really helpful resource for them to have to reflect and to take notes. So if I wanted to open that up, I could. It shows me the link. Saves them all here so I can see my student responses, and this just shows you what the sessions always look like. It always gives you one blank one. That's the first one in your folder. And that doesn't have any student work on it. So it tells you what the student's name was that answered this. And this was just me participating in my own session. So that's why it looks this way. But it gives students a space to summarize their thoughts right there. So it's kind of similar to Cornell notes in a sense. Gives them a space to take notes at the bottom of each slide. It even puts hyperlinks that you had on your slides right there as well. And then it shows their responses to Pear Deck questions. So as you can see, I put a lot of effort into that response. All right, so that is the takeaways feature on Pear Deck. It is one that I strongly recommend that you check out and use. All right, so other helpful features here, whenever you're starting to get going with Pear Deck has a lot of pre-made slide decks and whole sessions that you can borrow and utilize as you need to. There's the Newsela Daily Decks, which are for an English language arts teacher. It takes current event articles from Newsela, which is a publisher, and builds questions for them. They put those out usually every week or two. Then there's the PBS News Weekly Wonders, and these are little short video clips or news articles that PBS puts out, and then Pear Deck makes a whole series of questions related to them. So I really recommend checking those out as well if you're wanting to get your feet wet with Pear Deck. Now, this would be the point in the session where you could start tinkering around with things and thinking about how you can use Pear Deck in your role, maybe in an upcoming lesson to get students started. And I do have additional resources on here as well. There's the 201 slides and the 201 recording. And there's additional tutorials here. One of them features a BCSE teacher who was using Pear Deck in really great ways, and you can borrow some of his ideas specifically for e-learning. If you have questions, please let me know. You'll get your professional growth points for participating in this via email if you fill out the Google form that's associated with this. And thank you, and I hope you have fun with Pear Deck.